Hello and welcome to the Peace for the World series. And today I'm with Ian Watson. And Ian Watson, he's created a website called the Inside Space. And what Ian is all about is facilitating and coaching people how to have a better experience of life. And he's also traveling the whole world, helping and supporting people. And Ian's background is not so common. He's coming from homeopathy and healing, and I think it will be very interesting how this will also show up during this interview and how he can relate some abstract concepts to his practical background. So, hello, Ian.
Hello, Sebastian. Nice to be here, and
Yeah,
thank you so much for inviting me. It's a big pleasure to come and talk about this. And I don't know if you want me to just start talking. If there's anything specific you want to ask me to get the ball rolling.
yeah. You said beforehand that you would like to talk about outer peace and also about inner peace and how this is related to creating peace on Earth. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because just a few minutes before we started, I thought I'm just going to quickly look the definition of peace in the dictionary, see what it means, because I have an assumption about what it means, but I thought I was curious. And it was funny because the dictionary that came up, I did it online, so it probably you get different things depending where you look. But the one that appeared to me, it had two definitions. Number one was freedom from disturbance or tranquility, which is clearly an internal
Yeah.
state. And number two definition was a state or a period in which there is no war, which is clearly an external state. And I thought it's very nice and very fitting that they have it in that sequence, because to me, that is really the essence of what I would like to talk about, and the way that I see it and have come to understand it is that the conflict that we experience externally in life, whether it's an individual conflict with a person that we're not getting along with, or whether it's a conflict between a whole community or a nation to nation, for a long time I've come to understand that that is just a reflection of an internal conflict within the hearts and minds of human beings, and that there is no resolution. There cannot be any lasting resolution in the external without a corresponding shift in the internal. It has to come from the inside first. Otherwise, what we get is a solution which gets imposed on people usually, and they don't believe it. They don't buy it, and it doesn't sustain. And to me, that's always been obvious that that the externally imposed solution was not sustainable. And it struck me as naive that politicians to this day think that conflicts can be ended by killing people or bombing people or restricting people's freedoms, and so forth. So that was really my starting point for this morning. And it's also the same track that I came to through my work. You mentioned that my background was in homeopathy, so I worked a lot with people for about 15 years in that field. And usually people would come initially because they had a health problem, that wasn't being helped by the traditional medicine, and I would do my best to help with that. And then as I got to know people and build a relationship with them, they would often come back with something else. Would say, well, the headaches are okay, it's not such a big problem. However, how about my marriage? Can we talk about that? Can we talk about the fact I've got this problem at work? I've got this difficulty with my children. And very quickly, I would find myself completely out of my depth, trying to help people to resolve the conflicts and the struggles that they were having in their life. And I realized that, first of all, that I was underqualified to help them, because usually I had the same struggles in my life. I could relate to what they were saying. So that set me on a journey of seeking and discovering what else could I find that could help people, but not only other people, myself as well. And that's how my work gradually shifted into the more, let's say, internal dimensions of finding out what's going on inside people. And I noticed that you can help people with a certain problem area of their life, but if they haven't made a fundamental shift in their understanding, let's say in their consciousness, then what it looks like to them is that a new problem gets created somewhere else. And it seems to be different and unrelated. And then when that one gets solved, oh no, there's another one over here. And I just saw that, when you work with a lot of people over a lot of time, you start to see the common threads. And I thought, wow, everybody's doing that. And nobody notices, and it really seems to make sense to address these individual problems. And yet I was aware that the work that I was doing wasn't addressing the underlying tendency to keep creating new problems. And it was only getting into this understanding that we call the three principles that helped me with that, that was for me the missing link. It was the missing piece that helped me to see where it's all coming from, and why we can be so blind to the fact that we ourselves are participating in the in the drama of our life. We're not just the victims of it. It's not being inflicted upon us. We're actively participating in the creation of it innocently because of a misunderstanding, because we don't see the role of thought in creating experience. So that was a game changer for me, and it's been a game changer for in my work, sharing with other people. And one of the most amazing side effects that I've seen already over and over with this understanding is that people do start to regain a sense of peace and equanimity within themselves, or at least they start to see that it gets harder and harder to blame the outside world. Let's say if you don't get as far as feeling at peace, at least it gets harder to take seriously the idea that someone else is disturbing your peace. When you start to understand, when anyone starts to understand that their own feeling state is being created from within them 100% of the time, even if we just get a little hint of that, a sense of it, then sooner or later, it's like the game's up, we can blame our neighbor, we can blame our partner, we can blame our children, and then we get this niggle at the back of our mind that says, hang on, it doesn't work that way. It's not coming from out there, it just looks like it is. That's just the illusory nature of the way that life works. And once you start to see that, it settles us down, first of all, and it stops us projecting our own ideas onto other people as to what we think. Normally the way that I've gone about trying to bring peace in my personal life was, well, if I can just get the other people in my life to be different, then all my problems will disappear. And of course it doesn't work that way, and everybody else is playing the same game. They're trying to get me to change, I'm trying to get them to change, and it's the blind leading the blind. And what's beautiful about this is that when any one person, let's say, wakes up to the nature of life, and they see that experience is being created from the inside, then when you change on the inside, you change your relationship to the outside, so that even if someone still wants to be in conflict with you, they find themselves fighting with themselves now. If you're not engaging on the level of conflict and you're not playing the blame game anymore, well, there is no conflict. And what I've noticed is that people get bored of fighting with themselves at a certain point.
Do you have any story that illustrates this this non-fighting that comes when you accept other people, when you don't try to change them, or when you just see that maybe someone else is a bit lost in what they're doing at the moment?
Yeah, I could share many stories from what people have told me, but I could also share my own story, because it's one of the things that was most noticeable for me when I came to this understanding. In my own personal relationship with my wife, we had a good relationship, plenty of love in the relationship, and we fought periodically, and we'd have terrific fights that we'd rationalize were part of a healthy relationship. And anybody we'd ask would agree, yeah, that's part of a healthy relationship. Every now and again, you really give each other hell. And something in me didn't feel altogether comfortable with that. I kind of knew that wasn't right, but I didn't know, there wasn't anything that I had tried or that we had tried as a couple that seemed to be able to get us beyond that. And yet, learning this understanding, I just remember I was in conversation, I think, with Chip Chipman one time, who you will know, I'm sure.
Yep.
And he's well known in the three principles field. And I mentioned this to him, that it was one of the things, because we were talking about the theme of relationship. I mentioned that, this was one of the unexpected side effects of the understanding for me, was that my wife and I seemed to lose interest in maintaining the kind of fights that we used to have on a fairly regular basis. So we would find ourselves moving in that direction, and then one or the other of us would go, "Nah, that's not what we really want to do. We don't really want to be in conflict with
Yeah.
each other," and we would find a way to negotiate it peacefully. And for me, the fascinating thing was that we hadn't figured that out. We didn't do any work, or we weren't consciously doing anything different to make that happen. It was arising out of the fact that something in our consciousness had moved to a different place. We had an understanding, let's say, that we didn't have before. And it just no longer became an option for us to blame the other to the extent that we would get into a lengthy fight about it. And I remember Chip saying to me, I kind of mentioned this in passing, and he stopped me and he said, "Ian, that's huge. That's huge. Do you see how big that is?" And I hadn't seen how big it was, but he was right. When I reflected on it, I thought, wow, yeah, that has made a big difference to my life, because, when you get in conflict with your loved one, it colors your experience of the relationship. Even when you're not in conflict, you're kind of wondering when you will be the next time, So you're thinking about, how's it going to go, and so forth. And just to be able to see that you can live harmoniously with your loved one in a way that you hadn't seen was possible before, that to me was a revelation. And now, of course, I see that frequently with people that I work with. People often come because they can't see something as being possible. It looks to them that the only way my life can change is that other person has to change, or I have to leave them, or I have to move to a different situation. And for people to be able to find that, no, they can be at peace within themselves in the same situation. It's powerful. It's powerful for people. And when they see that, when they wake up to that, it changes the whole dynamic. And suddenly what was a war zone environment, whether it's in, between just one or two people, or whether it's much bigger than that, suddenly they start to see a possibility that they could get along with that person in a different way. And for me, if that can happen one-to-one individually, then that gives me hope for what can happen on a bigger scale.
Wow. What I'm hearing right now is that often we either try to deal with our past, with what happened, and how to fix the past or to talk through it, or we project something into the future, what might happen, what will show up, and we are afraid of the future. And what is missing is to really enjoy this moment that we're having right now.
Yeah, it's beautifully put, and you're absolutely right. And you start to see increasingly that is the source of our suffering, is when we either we're dwelling on the past and we're bringing memories and experiences from the past, and they're contaminating our experience of the present, or we're doing the same, we're projecting into an imaginary future which doesn't exist except in our own thinking. Do we know what's going to happen tomorrow, even, let alone in a year's time or a month's time? We start to make assumptions that we know these things. We don't know. And then we're modifying and adjusting ourselves based on those made up assumptions. So you're right, this is a big source of suffering in the world. And also, at the same time, we're making huge assumptions about other people which are not true. So that's another piece to this, which I've seen in my own life and in my own work, is that the reason it looks like we can't get along with people is because we've got a lot of thinking, we've got a lot of ideas, a lot of assumptions, some of them based on past experience, many of them just made up, about who that person is, who we'd like them to be, who we wish they were, who we wish they weren't, and also who we think we should be in relationship to them, and what we think they think of us. And it's layer upon layer upon layer. And then we wonder why we get into misunderstanding with people. We're not communicating human to human, soul to soul, as we actually are in this moment. We're communicating through this very foggy lens of who I think you are based on my very limited experience of you. But, I'm still hurting over what you said 6 months ago, so I'm going to let that color
Yeah.
the way you look to me. And that's the beginning of trouble. You know, we can't have an authentic relationship with someone except in the present, as we are now, and accepting the other as they are now.
So if somebody is watching this and feels like, okay, it sounds like true, but sometimes I just get lost. And how can we really see it for ourselves that something is right now coloring our experiencing, that that
Yeah,
something seems like a bit off?
well, it's a good question. And first of all, yeah, I get lost too. So welcome to the human condition. That is not going to stop happening through developing an understanding of these principles. However, there's a difference between getting lost and not knowing that you've got lost, and not knowing that there's a place you can come back to, versus getting lost and knowing that it's just temporary, and what you're actually lost in is a thought created reality, which is transient. It's going to come and it's going to go, and with a little bit of time you're going to find your center again. So getting lost is not the problem. You know, to me, it's not that we want to get to a place where that never happens. It is going to happen. We're all going to get lost at times. But in the midst of that, if we have an understanding that our experience is generated from within us, and in a sense, each of us is like a closed system. You know, we have our own integrity within which all of our feelings are being generated by our own thinking in the moment. Nothing else. Nothing else can break through that. And as we start to see that, you know, usually most people will see it in one area first, and then they'll start to extend that understanding out. But if we just see it in one area, that's going to be helpful, because what will happen there is that that area of life that seemed to be causing trouble for us suddenly seems to be okay. You know, that source of conflict, what appeared to be a source of conflict, suddenly isn't. And that forces us to get curious. It's like, how did that happen? You know, I didn't work on making that go away. I didn't work on making that change. And yet I can get along with that person now. I couldn't before. Interesting. And when people get curious like that, that's great, because what they're learning to do is to look in the direction of where all experience is coming from, not just with this person. And that's what, you know, that's what we call the ongoing education of this, the lifelong learning of this, is starting to see it more and more in different areas of life where we're not seeing it yet. But the feedback that's helpful is the feeling feedback that we get from the body. So we can take it as a given that if we ourselves are in a feeling that is stressful for us, you know, whether we call it upset or anger or frustration, or, you know, one of those, what we would call a stressful, unpleasant, uncomfortable feeling, we can be sure that our own thinking in the moment has become contaminated with something untrue, something unreal, which we are momentarily believing. We're momentarily mistakenly believing it as being true. So if I start to believe my own thinking about somebody and I find myself getting upset, the very fact that I'm getting upset to me now is indicative that my own thinking is probably unreliable in regard to that person. It's probably unreliable, because as soon as I see straight, as soon as I see clearly, I feel comfortable again. I settle down again. So the feeling feedback is very helpful in this regard. But again, we're not going to learn it all overnight, or very rarely do people, you know, get it to that depth. For most of us, it's an incremental, ongoing learning. And that's okay. You know, you celebrate the gains and don't worry about the areas where you haven't seen it yet.
Funny enough, I was just called, and it was probably my grandma. And a thing that I would like to ask you is, early in my life, I worried a lot, like what other people think of me and what the future might bring. And I think a lot of people in their early 20s or so, they don't know where to go, or they're like worried about if they get a job and stuff.
Yeah.
What do you see in regard to worrying, that that could help people?
No, you're pointing to something which is endemic now. I think a lot of young people do feel they feel under pressure to know things that they don't actually know. You know, it's like, what are you going to do with your life? I don't know. And from that place of insecurity, we make silly decisions. And that's true of, whatever age or stage of life we're at. When we're feeling scared and insecure and uncertain, we tend not to make the smartest decisions for ourselves. So to me, it's important that people recognize, first of all, that there is a place within all of us, no matter what age we're at, that knows what's right for us at that stage in our life. And only we can know it. Nobody can tell it to us. No one can teach it to us. The best that people can do is to help us to uncover it and to trust it, to trust the wisdom that you have. And for me, what I've seen with young people, a big part of that is giving them permission to not know. It's like, actually, just let it be okay that at this stage in your life, you don't know. And you get to experiment. You get to find out. You get to play with different things. And it's like trying on a set of clothes and seeing whether it suits you. And at a certain point, you're going to put something on and you're going to go, oh yeah, I like this. I like the feel of this. And you're going to move in that direction. And then you're probably going to get fooled and think, well, this is who I am. That's what happened to me. I fell in love with homeopathy. It wasn't just a job for me. It was a vocation. I really loved that work. I couldn't imagine myself ever doing anything else. And then suddenly I found my work had gone out of homeopathy. I was like, how did that happen? That wasn't in my game plan, So I had to revisit that place of not knowing and wondering for a while. And it can be scary because we're used to associating security with what we do know, with what we're sure about, what's already familiar to us. And we associate insecurity with the unknown. But what you gradually come to learn is that all the good stuff is in the unknown. Everything that you haven't yet experienced or tasted, it's unknown to you. And so that's the place that we want to embrace. That's the place that we want to look to when we're uncertain. We don't want to avoid it and retreat into something that's familiar and comfortable. We want to get comfortable with sitting in the unknown. And, however we learn that, to me, that's an important learning for all of us. Because there are certain things that we just can't know until we know them. And it doesn't help to put pressure on yourself and say, well, I should know by now, I'm old enough. It doesn't care about that. The inner wisdom, let's say the deeper intelligence that is really at work in all our lives, it has its own schedule, and it has its own way of bringing things to life in us at the appropriate moment. And it's not down to us. It's not down to our own personal agenda at all. And if we get too fixed about what we think should be happening, we just put ourselves off track. That's been my experience.
Hearing you, it feels very natural what you're saying.
Yeah, it is natural. I'm glad that you're hearing it that way, because it is. I'm pointing to something that is innate. It is natural. It's not unusual, and yet it's something that many of us have been overlooking or not trusting. And and then we look outside of ourselves for something that we think we can trust, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work out. The authority is not outside of us. It's actually inside of us. That word's very fascinating to me, authority, because it's related to the word author. And the author is the one who writes the story. And many of us, we look for someone else to write the story of our life. And then at a certain point, we rebel against the story they've written for us. And quite rightly, we have to, because it's not our story. It was their idea of what was supposed to be a good life for us. It's not ours. At a certain point, we have to claim it for ourselves. If we don't do that early in our life, well, we get to revisit it later on, because we're going to suffer, If we're not living in a way that's true to our own nature and our own being, we get suffering feedback to alert us to the fact that we're not living in a way that's true to our nature. So to me, it is natural. And the more that people realize that, and I'm encouraged because I see a lot of young people these days who are seeing that for themselves. And they're not buying the idea that, they have to get a degree and then they have to get a job, and it has to be a job that pays a certain amount of money. And a lot of young people I know, and they're saying, "Don't think so." Yeah, it doesn't resonate with them in here, and they're saying, "Well, maybe I'll do that later, but I'm certainly not going to do that now. I'm going to go traveling. I'm going to do what inspires me first and foremost. I'm going to set up my own business on the internet and see whether it works. If it doesn't work, it's fine. I'll go and get a real job." And to me, I'm encouraged by that, because that's pretty much what I did as a youngster. I ignored the advice that I was given, and I followed my own star, if you like. I just followed my own interest. I followed my own passion all the way through, and it's never let me down.
It's beautiful. Just recently, I've seen a video from Seth Godin, and he was talking about education, and that the current system, people are educated now is just to get the degree, to get a family and whatever, and to be like in the system. But this doesn't solve problems, because oftentimes we don't ask the very important question: how can we solve the environment destruction? How can we solve racism, whatever shows up, like, or how can we solve the climate change and stuff?
Yeah.
And I think
it's an outdated model, and I think he's right. He's one of the people that's flagging that up for us. Is that this is an old model that maybe it served humanity at a certain stage in development to operate that way. It's not serving us now. It's not serving the interests of us or the planet. And there's enough people starting to see that now that is, there's a consciousness shift happening. But it's still down to the individual. We can't wait for it to shift, and then that's also a trap we can fall into. Is, oh well, I don't need to worry about it because it's everybody's getting it globally now, so pretty soon we'll all have it worked out. Well, I'm not saying we should worry about it individually, but it's still, to me, it's an individual. It's the transformation of the individual that will eventually transform the world. It has to be that way around, and I think that there's a tendency to be passive, in the face of what looks like it's just too big, it's too much, it's too awful, it's got too bad. But no, the individual transformation is, it can transcend that. It's incredible what can happen when a small number of people start to see something and get aligned with it, and they start, and it has an energy behind it, which is what I would call when the idea whose time has come, when it's timely, it's got an energy behind it. And I feel that that's true with this understanding that we're sharing with the three principles. People say, why is it suddenly spreading like wildfire now and it didn't before? Well, the idea is, the time has come. There's a readiness, there's a receptivity, and which is nice. We don't have to work quite so hard to get people interested in it. Suddenly they're interested, and they weren't last year, but now they are. So to me, that's it's a good sign. It's encouraging, and like Rudy was saying, and Jenny, I also try to orient people towards the good that is already within them and is already happening within their life, because we do get conditioned to look at what's wrong with the world and what's wrong with ourselves. I gave a talk recently. I called it "What's Right with You?" Because mostly people are asking what's wrong with you, and we're asking ourselves what's wrong with us. And well, see what's right with you. Look at what you've got going for you. You've got all the wisdom inside that you could ever need, and you've also got a mechanism by which you can know, through listening to your own feelings, you can know when you're paying attention to that wisdom and when you're not. How cool is that? And there isn't a human being on the planet who doesn't have that.
my grandmother is calling again.
You really have to join this call, I think.
Yeah. I think this is the perfect ending to point back to this feeling that is behind it, the energy that can transform not only you but also the entire world, and will, hopefully.
It already is doing. It's just, it's sometimes it's not so visible, but certainly in my world, I get to travel to different parts of the world. people say I go to Egypt, regularly. I was in Serbia last year. Been to places like Finland, Croatia. I'm going to Bulgaria in a few months' time. People say, "Oh God, what's it like in Egypt?" Because they've seen the media and they think I'm going to a war zone. I say, and I genuinely answer. I say, you know what? I only meet beautiful people there. And that is my experience. I'm not making that up. My experience is that people are the same. Humans are the same everywhere. We've got our cultural layer of difference, which is just, the conditioning that we grew up with. It's wafer thin. It doesn't take long to drop below that and to see the common ground that we all share. And I just see more and more that as people start to recognize that, first of all, within themselves, when you see it within yourself, you see what your own ground of being actually is and isn't, then you can recognize that in the other. The word recognize means to know again, which means you already knew it. We can't recognize something which is not already in us, which is not inherent. And what's beautiful about this is that that's the way that it spreads. People wake up within themselves, they find a more peaceful and tranquil or loving place within themselves, more accepting place. When they look out through those eyes and they approach their friends and neighbors from that place within themselves, it evokes something similar in the others. And that's beautiful, because then, the work continues. I might only go to a place one time. You might have a conversation with somebody. You might never see that person again, but the ripple continues.
Yeah.
And we don't know. We really don't know what the impact of that single conversation might have been. It can go on and on and on and on. And I think it often does. And that to me is, that's the way that peace will be achieved in the outer world. One person at a time, waking up to their true nature and being that, we are really the same. We're all in this together. We're not really in conflict with other people. That's just a symptom of the fact that we're in conflict with ourselves sometimes.
Beautiful. Wonderful. So if people want to catch up with you, what's the best way to do this?
Well, they can contact me via the website, theinsightspace.com, or find me on Facebook. We have a Facebook page as well, The Insight Space. Or feel free to drop me an email, ian@theinsightspace.com.
Yeah.
I don't think that's my grandma, but
Yeah, and one thing, Ian is very easy to talk to, and he's very approachable. So just contact him, and I think you will have a very, very nice chat.
Thank you, Sebastian. I'd love to hear from people if they've got any questions or just want to make contact. Yeah, I'd be very happy to respond. And thank you for doing these videos and making these available.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing the very deep and peaceful feeling to this episode.
My pleasure.
So, have a lovely day, and see you soon.
You too. I hope so. Bye-bye.